I don't want to say I would be a martyr or anything, but like believe in something so strongly that I'm willing to give up my life for it. And the scene that always strikes me from the movie is the final scene of Boromir, where he actually basically saves Frodo and Sam by kind of distracting the Uruk-hai. Every time I watch that scene, I think of the courage it took for him to kind of do that and be alone in that moment, and to stare down like death. Like literally, he's watching the guy, shoot the arrow at him. And so I think I admired his courage.
Today's guest, as we continue Tolkien's greatest characters, the apparently never-ending series. Thank you, Tolkien, for having so many characters to explore, but is a friend and now a relative of mine, Chris Tansey. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Derek, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing great. I have going back to teaching middle school 7th graders tomorrow, so this is my last day of freedom. Excited to talk some Lord of the Rings.
That's great. What do you teach?
I teach 7th grade English, actually.
Okay.
So we call it ELA, English Language Arts in Massachusetts. But yeah, no, I teach grammar, writing, reading skills, and I think actually I tell the kids probably most importantly is speaking and listening skills in the classroom. So
very nice. And do you have a full load of students then? Sort of
95 kids. Yep.
And how does that break down per session?
So I have 5 classes. On average, I have about 18 or 19 kids per class, which is really not bad compared to, you talk to other teachers nationally and they're trying to fit 30 kids in a classroom and some of them don't have enough desks and stuff like that. So I definitely lucked out. As you're being a teacher as well, I think you understand, like, even if it's just 18 or 19, there's a lot of different stimuli going on at once. Every kid's got different needs, has different ways that they want to share. So it's still a tough job, but it's a good job.
Oh, I'm so glad. And how far are you from Boston proper?
Oh, as the crow flies or driving?
Driving.
Driving? Well, geez, it depends. So if I'm leaving on, let's say, for example, the Monday after July 4th weekend and trying to get to Boston, that's going to take me 3 hours. But on a normal day driving to Boston, it's probably about an hour and a half.
Okay. Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, we kind of live on an isolated, well, it's not isolated, but technically Cape Cod is an island now because they created a canal in the 1920s. So to get there, you have to cross a bridge, and the bridge was built in the 1930s during the Great Depression. So cars were not as big of a deal. So there's just like 1 or 2 lanes for each side of the bridge. It's rough.
And how many people, do you know the population of Cape Cod these days?
That's a great question too. And that's a whole podcast on its own. In the off season, it's about, I think, 250,000. In the summers, it's a couple million.
Yeah. I believe that. We lived in a resort town for many years, Virginia Beach, and we would have a total of 3 million people come through in the summer season. So
that's crazy.
Yeah,
same thing probably. Yep.
Very similar. Well, in your classroom, I'm curious whether or not you get to share any of your Tolkien love with them. And then maybe second to that is tell me how you encountered Tolkien first and what that was like.
So no, to answer your question, with my current 7th graders, I have not. Unfortunately, I might after this podcast, maybe tomorrow, mention Lord of the Rings to them, but I haven't done so much of that in the past. But my own personal connection with it goes back to, actually 2nd or 3rd grade. My dad's side of the family was big Lord of the Rings, big The Hobbit. I remember my dad giving me a specific edition of The Hobbit that had illustrated pictures. And he gave it to me, I think I was 1st or 2nd grade, and I read that, or first or 2nd grade, and loved it. And then I remember the movies. This is one of my jokes, is that you're a millennial if you saw Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, in theaters. That was like a defining moment for me. So I saw the movies in 4th grade, it was around 2001, the first movie, and I was like, oh, cool, The Hobbit was a great read. Let me try Lord of the Rings. So I tried to read The Fellowship of the Ring in 4th grade, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I found it a lot less accessible. So I actually came back. I think it was during college or right after college. I just went through and I read all three of them in one summer. And I think obviously that's a much better age to read them. At least for me, it was. Because I think when I was in fourth grade, I was looking for plot and just like, I don't know, just quick action, easy to understand
Right.
stuff.
Right.
As you know, I think, I mean, you know more about this than I do, but I think there's a lot less obviously world building going on in The Hobbit than there is in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, there's like, I remember in the first 150 pages when I was in fourth grade, I got bogged down specifically with like the Tom Bombadil, like just the pages of poetry, and I'm like, I don't get where are the swords, where are the bow and arrows, like where's the movie? Yeah, so
Right. Right. We had a great conversation on Tom Bombadil, though. I always enjoyed having um, read his passages. I just liked his eccentric nature
yeah.
and transcendent existence, as it were. Well, it sounds like even though in fourth grade it was a bit of a challenge, you were a precocious child reading The Hobbit in first, second grade. I mean, that's quite advanced. Um, do they still say humble brag these days, or we moved past that?
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have told that. No, yeah, that's fair. Um, I remember like that was one of my favorite reading periods was around that time because I was actually living in Rhode Island and I had a bedroom with a small little closet, and I remember uh late at night I'd go into that little closet, lay on the floor, and it was just long enough for me to lay down in it, and I'd have a little reading light. I remember reading The Hobbit in that closet. It was kind of like a which is one of those the chambers with no desensitization. Like there's nothing except your reading light and the book.
Yeah,
And so I have fond memories of reading The Hobbit as a kid.
that's cool. So you had your own sensory deprivation closet.
That's the worst. See,
You,
this is my
you
yeah. I was on dad duty last night. So I think I got a grand total of 3 hours. So if you're gonna have to help me fill in the blanks with some of the words during the
yeah. Now
podcast.
you are a new father. How old is your little guy?
He was 5 months on December 28th, so he's a little guy. But you met him a couple days ago.
Yeah,
He's really blossoming. We'll probably try and get him reading The Hobbit in a year or two.
yeah. Something about him takes me into the world of A. Milne. Your son's just expressions and cheerful demeanor.
Oh my
Um,
gosh,
ve-
yeah,
Very sweet. Uh, I'm before we jump into your characters, I know we need to get there, but I also am curious in terms of your own study for your teaching degree. What other writers or artists have always kind of inspired you?
that's a great question. Um, and I think it actually might inform what I love about Lord of the Rings in my own way. But the one that has been with me since I would say college is Jack Kerouac. So books like On the Road. He wrote one called Dharma Bums. As you know, he's got big in the 1950s and 60s, kind of like an Americana traveling with friends, semi autobiographical. Catholic writer. He was a lapsed Catholic, but he still had a lot of that spirituality in him. So I just really connected with his writing and the way he wrote. His prose is very poetic and kind of. Truman Capote, I think, once said that Jack Kerouac's writing is not writing, it's typing, because what he would do is he'd have this little, key was it fill in the blank for me. Not the computer, the
No, word processor,
he had a typewriter, and he
typewriter.
would just typewriter so that when he wrote On the Road, he wrote the whole thing in about 6 days, and he just nonstop. And so what he was trying to do with his writing was mimic kind of the music of the time, the jazz, with like a lack of structure. So
Mm.
some people love it. I loved it. Truman Capote obviously did not. Um, so him, I also love when in college for me a big formative one was Albert Camus, The Stranger.
Wow.
Just like the idea of absurdism. But I don't know how that would relate to Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I'd say those are the two major ones that have been formative for me.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
let's talk about a couple of characters. You're getting 2 characters for your series
Yeah,
episode,
I'm
and
lucky.
I like that. We've done that once before, and it went well, and I like what you would like to speak to in terms of your own interaction with these characters over the years. But your 2 characters, first is Boromir, and then we'll discuss Gimli. And so I'd love for you to give me an idea of what speaks to you, or perhaps if there is an archetype that Boromir fills the bill for you as a college-aged reader.
Yeah, totally. So I kind of look at this, the structure of kind of these two characters for me is I felt each one kind of represents who I was or am at the moment. Um, so for Boromir, for example, I think his archetype for me was kind of this when I was in college and high school and my early to mid 20s, this kind of tragic hero who's complicated, complex, emotional, um, like not always good, but redeems himself at the end, which is still an archetype that I love with characters in general, kind of a redemption arc. Um, I understood and connected with him because he's extremely loyal to Gondor. He wants what's best, and he's willing. I think in my own life, I was this way too. Sometimes the ends justify the means. So it's like, well, I have a good reason for wanting the ring and to use it. Um, and I felt in my own life sometimes I was the same way. So I connected with the kind of the complexity of Boromir.
Yeah. Is there anything or a period in your personal journey that you would say jumps out in your memory? Either like uh, an area that you were passionate about as he was about Gondor, or perhaps your own complicated sorting it out, like,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Well, I think especially when I was younger, I was very much a romantic, and my idea was I want to live and this is going to sound crazy, but die for an important cause. I'd like not I don't want to say I would be a martyr or anything, but like believe in something so strongly that I'm willing to give up my life for it. And the scene that always strikes me from the movie is the final scene of Boromir, where he actually basically saves Frodo and Sam by kind of distracting the Uruk-hai. And the amount of every time I watch that scene, I think of the courage it took for him to
Mm.
kind of do that and be alone in that moment, and to stare down like death, like literally he's watching the guy, shoot the arrow at him. And so I think I admired his courage, and I think this is what I would say. I think I admired most about him is the fact that even though he was complex and he was not like completely good, the good won out on in the end. Like he had enough strength, he had enough courage, he had enough principles to see the light and redeem himself and also save Frodo and Sam.
Would you say that in your estimation or your own experience, let's say, would there be some notes of that would resonate profoundly with your generation? The reason I bring that up is, having taught college for many
Hmm.
years, I certainly have had students in your generation as part of my classes. And you referencing you wanted to have something worth living for and ultimately dying for. Um, I don't know that is so abundant these days. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting. I like that because I'm fascinated by like generations and the differences between, for example, millennials and Gen Z. Um, I honestly, this is what I would say. It's harder for me to analyze millennials. I'm a millennial because I am one, and so I have never taught millennials. But teaching Gen Z, I completely agree with you. I think there's a certain amount of, without generalizing too much, nihilism with Gen
Hmm.
Z, which I think honestly is somewhat fair given just what they're exposed to with the
Yeah.
media.
Yep.
It's a response to that. With millennials, I think I don't know. I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on that. What did you experience or what did you see when you were teaching millennials?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to it. As a member of Gen X, I think I have been struck. Maybe I'm projecting my own ego, but I've often felt like a bridge generation between two worlds where the boomer generation grew up completely in a world pre-internet, and I did too, but I was young enough when it dawned that I engaged with it in a meaningful way. We first got emails my second or third year of college, so that
Right.
kind of indicates where I'm at.
Yeah.
But if as many people have watched Stranger Things in the last few weeks, that was the era I grew up riding bikes, being
Yes.
gone. There's nobody looking out for you and checking in on you, but there's also no, as you point out, exposure, a constant
Yeah.
inundation of uh, video, mostly, right? Of things, just
That's
rampant, endless
totally.
things.
Totally. And actually, I think
uh,
that you bring up a really sorry to interrupt. You bring up a really interesting point about the bike riding and not have it's I feel like 80s culture has been huge for millennials. Whether it's that or it's the Goonies or I mean, there's so many shows and movies with like kids on bikes who have no parental control and there's like 80s music in the background, there's like aliens, like that's like a whole genre on itself. And I think that's huge for millennials because I think to your point, we had the opposite.
yeah,
Like I grew up with 9/11. I grew up with anthrax. I grew up with, I mean, I was in Washington, D.C. when there was something, the D.C. sniper. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
That was the year after 9/11. So being in D.C. with the Pentagon and then a year later, literally not being able to go outside for recess because of the D.C. sniper. And I think that was also a national thing. Parents, rightfully so, were scared. And so the kids had less freedom.
Yes.
And so I wonder if that plays a part in why kids now, millennials, are not as invested. I mean, there's probably multiple reasons, but part of it might have been because they didn't have that a chance to explore or to do those things or build their own. Uh, you know what I mean?
Yes, and thus the popularity of programming that puts that on display.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a nostalgia for something that you never had, and
Innocence and
um,
freedom. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and the ability to actively use one's own imagination without having some exterior generated story, game, whatever.
And
Uh,
that's a wonderful point, Derek, because I mean, isn't Stranger Things based on Dungeons and Dragons, which is a game that's literally based on like you need to use your own imagination.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Well, thank you for entertaining that thought. I like you, I am fixated on how the demographics and the generations interplay with one another and affect each other. And I think we are at a juncture that will reveal itself in 50 years from now to have been a very pivotal one.
yeah.
My hope is that there is a return to the nobility, the bravery, the altruism that you talk about in Boromir. However, there, as you also pointed out, the ends justify the means aspect of Boromir. Um, where would you say you see that being revealed in his character and nature?
I mean, I specifically in terms of like trying to take the ring away from Frodo. Um, and I was actually reading up on Boromir before we did this, and I actually learned in some new things. When I watched the movies, when I did books, I thought there a lot of it was his own ego and wanting to make himself stronger. But on my research, and correct me if I'm wrong, his main motivation was just to help Gondor. Like he thought this would help Gondor, this would save Gondor and hopefully Middle Earth. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I think that there was a deep desire, as played out, but that sort of former glory of Gondor to be restored, right? And I
Yeah.
and I think that's the other master stroke with Tolkien in these characters is this is a type that goes back to time immemorial and yet forever resonates, particularly in the hearts of young men looking for adventure, right?
Totally. Which Jack Kerouac on the road. So to get back to your point on that, especially as a young man, I was fascinated by characters who had an obsession or struggled with the concept of power. So, for example, my favorite essay that I ever wrote in high school was about Macbeth. And what I did in Macbeth, and it was actually really hard. I don't know if I succeeded, but I wrote a paper trying to defend some of his actions. And Boromir is obviously a much better person, morally, ethically, whatever you want to say, than Macbeth. But there are some similarities in the idea of like, I need to gain power. And how am I willing, like, what am I going to do to get there? And where Macbeth makes the choice, you know what, I'm going to do the wrong thing. And that kind of, you know, he's damned for that. Boromir at the very end decides to go in a different direction. But I think they're both struggling with this idea of like, how can I get power? And if I get power, I will do much more with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Which that's also like in terms of political figures. I'm fascinated by populists on both sides of the aisle, both leftists and right. There's a guy in Louisiana, the Kingfish, the governor. I forget his name, but he was like a huge enemy of FDR, and his whole thing was like one of the most corrupt politicians I think America's ever had. But actually, there was free public education. There was an amazing healthcare system. There was all these things, and he used the corruption to make that happen. And not a good guy, and can't defend his actions, but at the same time, the results are there. Same thing. There's another. You probably may have heard of this guy named Buddy Cianci, who was the mayor of Providence. That's where I was born. I was in Providence, Rhode Island, and I grew up for part of my life there. And actually, while I was reading The Hobbit, he was the mayor of Providence. And before he came to Providence, before he was the mayor, Providence was basically like other cities in New England, Hartford, Worcester, Fall River. It was a kind of a burnout, post-industrial city with not a lot going on. Buddy Cianci came in, was probably the most corrupt politician in Rhode Island history, but actually made the city engaging. He brought he brought entertainment, he brought artists, he brought cuisine. He literally had the creative idea to cut off the highways that were cutting through the city and actually build rivers going through it. Now they have a very famous summer festival every year called Waterfire, where they literally light like the water on fire on these rivers, and people come from all over New England. So like, again, terrible guy, but doing good things. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and of course, probably the most not the most notorious one, at least in American history, broadly speaking, right? Outside of those who grew up in certain regions, which would be like Boss Tweed,
Yeah.
in New York City.
Tammany
And
Hall, right? Yeah.
yeah, Tammany Hall, and the sort of patronage concept. And part of that is, as you reflect on, the rise of populism, but also notions of collectivism and this ever shifting dynamic that has always been around. I mean, I think it's interesting how we can be frozen in a particular period and think, this is the worst ever, or this is the best ever, whatever it might be.
Yes.
But when you consider the shift from feudalism to pseudo democracy, whatever we now inhabit,
Yeah.
and there's always going to be the desire for people to accrue power to themselves, and if they can, in a way, as you say, be benefactors of a large enough segment of the population, they can maintain that power. Now, Boromir and often these folks tend to manifest in violent means, either behind the scenes, with mob boss type actions, or just, instigating real wars. And so Boromir's a warrior,
Yep.
and Gondor is not what it once was. Do you have any thoughts on his desire to fight just
Yeah.
generally?
Totally.
Yeah.
I think and this goes back to why I liked him when I was in my late teens, early 20s, is because looking back on it now, it's arrogance, but I was really connected with his pride. And in a lot of ways, that is his downfall. He wants what's best for Gondor, and that's why he wants the ring. But he has this throughout the movies. You see it too. This just like, I'm better, I'm stronger because I'm from Gondor, and that's actually one of his fatal flaws. Which at the time I didn't really see that. I was like, oh, this guy's cool, and he's complex, and he believes in himself, and he's willing to do what it takes. But as I've gotten older, I've looked back on it. I'm like, he's one of the most arrogant characters in the book, in the series. And his pride is what actually causes most of his issues. And if you think about it, his pride is actually what he thinks he's saving Gondor. But if he takes that ring, I mean, they're probably not going to succeed. He's going to become evil himself. The whole thing fails. So it's like his pride gets in the way to actual success.
And his pride, that's a great segue to his lack of humility. How would you say, in terms of the broader cast of characters, Tolkien uses that as a juxtaposition versus some of the other, for lack of a better word, leading men in the tale?
Yeah. So like versus, for example, Samwise or Frodo,
Aragorn,
or
of
Aragorn.
course, right?
Yes,
Or even his own
yes.
brother, obviously, the most obvious,
Faramir.
Faramir. And there'll be an episode on Faramir that precedes yours on
Oh, cool.
Boromir. So,
Cool.
yeah.
I think obvious. So can you repeat the question one more
Yeah,
time?
just his lack of humility
Yep.
and ease with which he resorts to warfare as the solution,
Yes.
comparing that pride and arrogance that he has to those other characters.
Well, I think, and this is something that I do teach the kids we've been working on recently, is foil characters. So obviously a character that has the exact opposite traits of another character to kind of highlight that character's flaws and strengths. And I think Faramir is a great foil for Boromir. Boromir, as you said, is humble. He's more thoughtful. He's still a warrior, but I think he's much more discerning in when he uses violence. And I think Tolkien's use of Faramir is kind of teach us a lesson that even though sometimes it's harder to do the right thing and people might not like it, aka Faramir's dad hates Faramir because Faramir's not Boromir. He's not arrogant. He's not pro Gondor all the time. He's not, even when your own family is turning against you, it's important to do the right thing. And I don't know if Tolkien planned it this way, but obviously Boromir dies. Faramir lives. At least in the movies, I think he also gets the girl, doesn't he? Doesn't he marry the Rohan lady?
Yeah. Eventually, Eowyn and Faramir come together.
Yeah. So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's like, do good, be good, you will get good things happen to you, karma. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, since you brought up karma, I'm curious about any thoughts you might have on Tolkien's faith and just generally within the work of Lord of the Rings. And we all know he was a very devout Catholic, and there's lots of commentary on his continued efforts to have Lewis convert all the way, as it were. But
The jokes in Catholic circles is that C.S. Lewis is an honorary Catholic. Like I went to a very Catholic high school, and we read a lot of Lewis. We read Screw Tape Letters, and like that was a big deal. So
yeah,
that's
yeah. I was going to say for those of us like myself who grew up as a low church Protestant in America, the Anglican, British Anglican is pretty much the same thing in terms of our exposure to the liturgy.
Yes, it's very similar. I joke with Ruth sometimes that she's Lutheran. I'm like, it's basically the same thing, just a few differences. Small guy named Martin Luther. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but speak to that with Tolkien and if you would.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most interesting questions. Because I could actually trace Tolkien and some of the people that were of his lifetime and his thought processes in reading them and how that changed kind of my own outlook on the world, and then probably led me to like liking a character like Gimli more than Boromir. So to answer that time period, the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and America especially, but worldwide is, I think, fascinating, especially post World War II. One of my favorite writers, spiritual writers, is Dorothy Day. I don't know if you know Dorothy Day, but she was a social
Yeah,
activist. Um,
absolutely.
and she believed in an economic theory that actually J.R.R. Tolkien held too, called distributism. And the idea being that, and this is something that's it's hugely influential for me, is that you can neither trust the government nor corporations completely. What you really need to do is you need to trust local community.
Hmm.
And you believe in private property, you believe that people have the right to private property, to make money, to own things, but also there's a certain amount of responsibility to your next door neighbor. You need to know your neighbor. You should be helping your neighbor if like if they're running out of food. Like, so the idea is actually fascinating, because I was reading this, could be wrong on it, but J.R.R. Tolkien was inspired partially with distributism to create the Shire. So the idea is that like the Shire is the ideal place. Everyone's looking out for each other. Obviously, everyone has their own like hobbit hole. Um, so kind of a collectivism in a way that I really liked. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that helps answer it, but Dorothy Day is a huge influence. Thomas Merton.
Hmm.
Um, and I think both of them come from a very humble place of, I'm not going to be the one. I know for a fact that power corrupts. So Dorothy Day, for example, if you put me in power, or Thomas Merton, if you put me in power, I'm going to do the exact same thing that someone else is going to do, and it's going to turn bad. So how do we almost, I don't know what the right word is, de-escalate or de-emphasize power? Well, we focus more on our neighborhood. We focus more on our town. We focus more on our city. And that way we can hold people more accountable, and we have more compassion and empathy, because we literally know the people that we're paying taxes for. We literally know the people that we're helping, what they need. Um, and that this is a whole nother podcast, but the whole dichotomy of like, oh, liberals, corporations bad, conservatives, government bad. It's like, I think that's just a false narrative, false dichotomy, because both of those things, in my opinion, work together to create problems. But
Right.
um, so yeah, you know more about J.R.R. Tolkien's background, but I think he was definitely at least um, tied in with that thinking, that Catholic thinking at the times, Catholic social teaching.
Yeah.
Um, And I know a little bit about, he joked around about being an anarchist. I don't think he was serious about it, but he said at some point, like, I'm kind of an anarchist. And when people hear that word, they think of like, burning buildings and like that's not what he meant, from my understanding. What he meant by that was, no, just de-emphasizing these centralized power structures, still having, government, but decentralizing the power so that like the individual is empowered, which I think is tied in with populism, actually, in a way. Except like often the way populism goes is like, oh, this one guy is going to represent me. That one guy becomes corrupt, So I
Right.
think it's funny. Yeah.
And the populism, at least it seems to be like rooted in a sense of vengeance, as opposed to, as you point out, helping your neighbor. So it ends
Exactly.
up being like, well, there's corruption on their side. Let's go get a bunch for ourselves, basically, because our cause is the right one. And I well, one of the things you mentioned, particularly with the notion of local, and of course, Dorothy Day, I believe her organization with the Catholic Workers Movement,
Yes. Yes.
very devoted woman and inspirational. And uh, I think of Alexis de Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America, and he referenced how just the widespread proliferation of voluntary organizations existed in this country. And he wrote that in the 20s, 30s he
Yeah.
was visiting. So from its inception, I think the uniqueness of the colonial structure and the local emphasis on voluntary, it carries forth to this day. If you look at graphs or data on per capita giving to nonprofit organizations. The U.S. is infinitely. Like, I mean, one I saw recently, it was something like 12-1
Yeah.
relative to Europeans.
Yep. And that I could go on a whole rant about that, but keep going. Just
Well, I would love for you to. I just want to point out that though much of what we're reflecting on happens to be, I would say we're in a bit of a trough period nationally in terms of attitude, if nothing else. Um, that the heritage of this place in that respect is one worth continuing to
yes.
support and pursue.
I agree. And actually I agree with everything you just said. My rant has more to do with the idea I don't have a problem with taxes as a concept. One of the problems that I see, I think philosophically, at least in this country with taxes, and probably in Europe too, is, oh, I paid my taxes, I've done my duty.
Right.
I mean, we can talk about where those taxes go. Are they actually going to helping other people? Are they actually, where are they going to fund wars? Are they going to fund things in the Middle East? Wherever they may be going. But my point is that I think that sometimes, and I've seen this with myself even, I'm not, and friends and family, it's like, kind of like, okay, well, I already paid my taxes. Those are going somewhere. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, you're not done. I'm not done. Like, and I think that's where the servile state comes in a little bit for me. That phrase is used a lot in the Dorothy Day, J.R.R. Tolkien circles, where it's like the state will take care of that other person. And we've seen with the programs in this country over the years, sometimes those programs are great, a lot of times they're not. So, like, what is the individual's responsibility to the individuals around them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think Dorothy Day was really intentional about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that Boromir has sparked such a robust conversation on how we care for our place in time. And in the end, as you point out, he does have a moment of self-sacrifice. And I want, if you would, you said you love the redemption arc characters who are flawed. Speak to it for me and for the audience, both with respect specifically to Boromir's character arc, but also just storytelling generally, why that matters for the human heart.
So, kind of Boromir's character arc and how that connects with. Okay. Um, I would start off by saying, like, a lot of the characters, some of the characters in the Fellowship seem very 2D to me. Flat, not as like a negative term, but just they're not complex characters. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's how I felt about Aragorn. I'm like, okay, Aragorn is just pure good. There's very few times where he does things wrong. And he's a man, but shouldn't a man have flaws? Shouldn't a man, So I think part of the reason why Boromir versus Aragorn was Boromir was a lot more relatable. I was like,
Mm,
this is a real human being. This is I see myself in this person, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about reading and literature is that unlike math or science, history to an extent, but English, you're putting yourself in every book you read if it's a good book. You're learning things from the characters. You're learning things about the world. You're learning themes, messages, wisdom, and I think a good book. And Tolkien does a good job of this. In a good book, you have complex characters that you can kind of be like, oh yeah, he did this right and he did this wrong. How am I doing in my own life with those things? How am I doing with pride? How am I doing with um am I someone who is results based, or do I have an ethical? So I really like that type of character. Almost I wouldn't say it's as strong. I don't know if I would term. I don't know what you would. Maybe I'd love to hear what you think on this. Is Boromir an anti-hero? I don't know. But I do have a fascination with anti-heroes in some ways. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know that I could give him that label
Yeah.
personally. Um, but maybe some fan fiction out there has created a Boromir. Uh,
Right. I guess
the
he's not an anti-hero because he redeems himself at the end, right?
right.
I think for much of the journey, I wouldn't say he's a strong anti-hero, but you're definitely I remember reading it and also watching like, oh, this guy, like, is he gonna turn out okay? Like, what's gonna happen with him? So maybe like a diet anti-hero for, part of Fellowship. But
Well, as we make the turn from Boromir to Gimli, Any last thoughts that you have on the character, and then in terms of your own resonance with him for the window of time in your life that you felt drawn to him as an inspiration, or at least as a comrade in arms as you struggled to find yourself in this world?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I think has developed me in some ways is I'm not saying I'm humble now, far from it, but like I've identified that one of my flaws is pride. Often will think I'm right, and I get very set in that. Uh, and I don't like being wrong. And sometimes I probably veer into being self-righteous, and so I'm aware of that, and I want to make sure that I'm not falling into that like Boromir does.
Wonderful. So, at what point in your life did you start to find yourself resonating with Gimli?
I would say about 3 years ago, honestly. Like this is a new thing. I think owning a house, being settled, it's kind of like having my own cave, and not wanting to be bothered by the outside world, and still having ideals and principles and a culture, but like not being an idiot, I guess.
Yeah. It,
Not, I mean, it's a harsh word, but like not being this complex, who am I, like emotional drama person.
I gotcha. Well, I mean, I do think that life at this point for me, in the generation of what am I? I'm 50s, in my 50s.
You don't look a
You're
day older than 44, Derek.
That there we go. That's the answer. We but you find yourself life, I think, is a succession of inward and outward experiences and seasons. And there's a, going forth into the world, and then there's a retreating back, as you have done, as you've described anyway, with your own little nest, um, your beloved wife, your new child. These are things that change your area of interest and focus, and hopefully for the better, right? More noble to live for others than for oneself. Gimli, what does Gimli live for?
That's a great question. I think Gimli lives for personal loyalty.
Okay.
I mean, I think he's very, uh, I don't, I don't know if he's like as pro, is it the Mines of Moria as Boromir is with Gondor, but he loves his family. I remember when they're in the Mines of Moria, he's devastated when he finds out that I think it's his cousin has died
Yes.
from the goblins in the cave. But also the loyalty he shows Legolas. Like this is someone who doesn't like elves and is willing to change his mind and learn and go to Lothlorien and be involved with elf culture. And by the end of the series, Legolas is one of his best friends. Um, and so I really admire that about him. I think he's steady, he's reliable, he's funny. Like he has a great sense. He has like a kind of an underhanded sense of humor. Sometimes it's very like it's a little bit self-deprecating. I think that's hilarious. Doesn't take himself too. I mean, this is the funny thing about Gimli is he sometimes takes himself very seriously, but other times he does not take himself seriously at all. Especially in personal relationships, he really people that he trusts, he lets himself go.
Interesting, right? I was gonna say, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that relationship with Legolas, particularly how much Gimli emphasizes, his disdain for the elves, and, what that relationship does, how it I think how what does it foster in the reader? I don't wanna put words in your mouth.
Well, first off, I would say I find I'm thinking about it now, and I haven't thought about this a lot, but I think the elves are kind of annoying.
A bit pretentious?
Anxious, or just like, oh wow, like you're perfect. Everything's perfect. You've never made a mistake. Like, oh cool, like you're great with a bow and arrow. You can kill hundreds of orcs in Helm's Deep. Like, congrats. You do nothing wrong. It's kind of like a pretty boy thing. And so I think what I love about Gimli is I kind of see myself as him in the way, like not putting on appearances, not just being himself. Which, to be fair, I think a lot of the elves are being themselves too. But I guess me being a human, I apply elves to humanity. I'm like, oh, when I see a human acting like that, I'm like, oh, all right, it's gonna be harder to connect. But yeah, no, I mean, their relationship is fascinating. I think it's really one of the things that's changed about me too is the fact that I think I'm more willing to hear all sides. And I'm not saying
Okay.
Gimli's great at that at the beginning, but Gimli is willing to take those risks by the end. And someone who's a completely different culture, like historically, they don't get along. I think in my own life, I've become more of someone who's trying to understand, and I'm getting back to politics, but in general, all those things, policies, trying to understand the rational voices on both sides, which I know the both sides thing, but yeah, so I think that's another aspect of Gimli.
Have you had a Gimli Legolas relationship in your life?
That's great. In what regard?
Just in where you encountered someone who was the antithesis of what you thought a person should be, or came from a very different culture, and you discovered over time a real fondness for one another. And I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
could be
no,
as
no,
simple.
no,
It could be
yeah,
as simple as befriending a Yankees fan. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, let me start by saying this: Laura doesn't have the personality of an elf, but her ears kind of look elfish. So me with my hoodie coming into Boston College grad class, we kind of started off with that friendship off the bat.
For
Me being
those
the
who don't
dwarf.
know, Laura is Chris's wife.
Yes, we met at Boston College. Um, and I think Laura, as you know, is a super organic, authentic person. But if she has the qualities of the elf, of like she's with it, as you know, like she's a great planner, she's organized, she's extremely competent, which are things that actually some of the major reasons I'm attracted to her. So there's another interesting thing, opposites attract maybe too. So maybe Gimli is friends with Legolas because they are different and they bring different strengths and different flaws to each other's relationship. Um, and in so doing, make each of them stronger because they can learn from the other person. So I guess I take back everything I said about the elves in the sense that my wife is in some ways an elf. And yeah, no, she's got all the good qualities of an elf.
Yeah. So next time I see you all, and just to make it clear, Laura is my niece by marriage. Um, but
I'm not going to be invited
maybe
to the next. I'm not going to be invited to the next retreat after this podcast.
no. I think it'll be lovely to call you Gimli and Legolas when you're together. But I
The funny
I
thing is,
do,
I'm tall like an elf, and she's about the size of a dwarf. So,
or a hobbit. Uh,
hobbit.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is I think that's the beauty of intimate relationships when the relationship is more important than the individual. And I don't mean that in a way where there's abuse or there's manipulation, but I mean when there's a cause that's greater than the individual, which is what your marriage is ultimately. And the Gimli Legolas dynamic is so, I mean, I guess you could say it's a bit exaggerated, like, in terms of the prototypical dwarf and the prototypical elf, and all those facets and features put together. It's the odd couple, and yet in the end, there's something really endearing, and it cements the relationship. I know,
Yeah.
my marriage here this coming year will be 26 years.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. And it's
I won't.
interesting.
I won't tell you how. I won't tell you how old I was when you got married. I don't want to. I won't do that to you.
Well, I know that you were probably not even school aged, so maybe
I
just
was,
barely.
but barely. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but speaking to what's interesting about this conversation, Chris, as we've continued to explore these characters, is how much they've revealed to us about society and about the family. And I love that because I think Tolkien's entire aim was to create a world that would serve as a mythology for England. That's often been noted, but to create a place that we can go back to again and again and be inspired in how we live our lives. So,
Totally, totally. And I actually wanted to add one thing that I thought was really beautiful that you said about Legolas and Gimli. I think the beautiful things about their relationship is the fact that you couldn't just put any elf and any dwarf together in the Fellowship and they'd get along. Like there was like even though Gimli and Legolas are very different, like they have that in common where I think like they can reach across the aisle. You know, like
yeah,
because correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Legolas is from Mirkwood. Is that correct?
I am not an
Okay, yeah,
aficionado of that.
okay.
Yeah.
But I think like there's like the Mirkwood elves, and then there's like the Lothlorien elves, right? And I feel like the Lothlorien elves are like, oh yes, I'm angelic, and like don't talk down to me, and like I'm your master effectively, or like the Elrond elves are like very like their own way. But I think the Mirkwood elves are more down to earth, and I think like, and I could be wrong on that he's a Mirkwood elf, but I don't think he was from Lothlorien or anyway. Gimli also, I think maybe there might have been other dwarf societies where everyone's like very hardened against elves, or like maybe there's something inside of them. But the fact that they had to both have that in them to be able to have a friendship, the
Yeah,
ability to seek the other out and to try and understand.
that's very good. Actually, I typed it in while you were talking just so we wouldn't make any mistakes. And Legolas is indeed the Sindarin elf prince of Mirkwood.
Okay.
So he is nobility, but he hails from Mirkwood.
Also,
And
he's seen some stuff if he's in Mirkwood was that's not a pretty place, like
right.
he's been through a lot. He's been through like the equivalent of the mines of Moria in his own life.
Yeah, that's a great point. And right, that's the essence of these relationships is that when you are forced to take on an enemy outside yourselves together, right? The enemy of my how does it go? The enemy
The
of
enemy
my
of my enemy is my
is my
friend, right?
friend. Yeah, right. So something going on there where you go through an ordeal, and I think Tolkien,
Yes.
obviously, and
Yeah.
his friends as soldiers forced to go to war, and in a lesser extent, experiences that you have with your friends, whether it be in sports or in college or different competitions, you forge memories that bind you together.
Band of brothers.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
That's a great point. I want to can I add one more thing to that? I think teamwork and collaboration is a huge part of their relationship, like you said. And Boromir is not that way as much. He's his own guy. He wants to do his own thing. Gimli ends up compromising. And so I think for my own life, like collaboration, working together, is important too.
yeah, and rooted back goes back in terms of the comments you made about the Dorothy Day movement
Yes,
and
exactly.
Tolkien, right?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
This social fabric. So speaking of that, one of the things I think is important is when we get to have cross-cultural experiences, that exposure to the unfamiliar helps it become less threatening or just less weird. And that happens when Gimli is welcomed into Lothlorien. I'd
Yeah.
love if you'd chat about that in terms of his experience, but also the relationship between the dwarves and the elves.
Um, So I'm going to be honest. My memory of this scene is almost solely based on the movie, and it's been a while since I saw the movie. But I do remember this from the movie. I remember, and it's kind of a comedic scene. When he walks in, he's like just super paranoid, and he's like very defensive, and he's very like, okay, I'm going to be attacked at any second. Um, I don't know what this says about me, but that's what I remember. I don't remember as much about him like being welcomed and changing his mind. I do remember that scene. I think they're walking under the trees and he's like looking up and he's like waiting for like, someone to attack him. But yeah, so I mean, it's cliche to say, but it's even though it's scary at first to go into a new culture or talk to people who have different views than you do, once you get over the initial thing and the initial fear and whatever it might be, there's a lot you can gain from it. And obviously he does in that scene and moving forward.
Yeah, you're so right. Well, and I think Tolkien does a great job because it left an impression on you of that universal experience of going into hostile territory, as it were, right?
Well, not to get it. Do you do the Enneagram at all? Do
I
you?
am familiar with it. In fact,
Okay.
we had a series last summer where one of our guests really chatted a good bit about that. But tell me why you
All
bring it
right.
up.
I won't. Yeah, because I think so. There's it's 1 through 9. I think Gimli's definitely a 6, which is he's a loyalist. So he worries a lot. He's super paranoid. He's got everything prepared. He likes to have his circle and he likes to know what's going on and he doesn't like uncertainty and he doesn't like necessarily new things. And him as a 6th, his character arc is like confronting that fear of the unknown and the fear of, and I mean, I think in the test, I paid the $35. I probably shouldn't admit that. And I got 6. I got a 6. So, and I see myself in the same way where it's like, I'm not going to like minimalize or stereotype myself, but I think there's a part of me for sure that's like that. Um, what I've been trying to do in my own life, I'd say the last 15 years, is be like Gimli and go to Lothlorien, if that makes sense, and expose myself to things that might make me scared or whatever, and then kind of exposure therapy in a way. So,
Hmm, that's really good. I've taken that test as well, and the
can I
6.
guess? Can I guess? You're
Please do. Everyone gives me a different number.
okay. You're not a 6.
No.
No, I think you are probably a 4 with either a wing 3 or a wing 5. I mean, obviously, I think probably a 4 with a wing 5.
All right. Well, I'll send you my little graph, and
All right. All
you
right.
can see for
Sounds
yourself. But
good.
the 6 was indeed the lowest thing on my scale in the
Yeah.
Enneagram
We're
system.
often considered very, like, people like 6s, but also like, you guys are nuts. Like, you gotta chill out.
But deeply loyal,
Yeah. Oh,
and
yes, very
right.
much so.
So I can appreciate that. And moving on to Mr. Gimli. Is there anything that you think we could learn from his pride in being a dwarf and the dwarfs being the best at so many things, right? Whether or not that's hubris or he actually thinks it, but um,
Part of me wonders if that pride comes from the fact that and the dwarves in general, they don't have exposure to the rest of the world. Like, you wouldn't know if you are all you know, if your culture is all you know. Of course, you're going to think you're the best. And I guess that's a tagline, or like we could do a commercial about travel and the importance of traveling to kind of get perspective. But I think through his travels, obviously, he gets some perspective on that. And I don't, you know more than I do, but I think by the end, he's probably not as adamant about his culture being the best. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Um, last couple of questions I've got for you, and really, where do you see Gimli's like? What I'll tell you what. Let me rephrase this with where I was going. What about Gimli in battle, in particular, is inspiring to you?
This is gonna sound so bad, but that's another great question. Uh, he, one of my favorites, my favorite scene of the movies by far is Two Towers, Helm's Deep, when we're shooting and make a game of it. Like, they make a game of the battle and they're having fun. And I just so connect with that because I'm like, this is this dark moment. It's terrifying. Like, you got orcs, Uruk, all these guys are probably going to take over, and you're out there laughing with your buddy, having fun. I mean, this is my favorite scene is Legolas on the shield going down the steps, just shooting the. I was like, when I was in 4th grade, I wanted to be that guy. But yeah, I think I don't even remember what the question was. But
Just what you love about Gimli in those moments when
he
the
he
stakes
uses
are the
he
highest.
uses he uses humor. He's a little self-deprecating. He finds the light in the darkness through his humor and creating games and having fun and having fun with his friends.
I love that. Um, do you have any thoughts? We've talked already quite a bit about Gimli and Legolas, but if you have any additional thoughts about that relationship, and then if you would just reflect on how these characters have helped you at different stages in life, if they have.
Okay, yeah. Well, I would say this with Boromir, for example. I honestly, I don't know if he helped me because I was like holding on to this ideal of like I'm gonna be like this tragic hero who everyone's gonna remember, and like I'm gonna be the one that's gonna be remembered for their heroism, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I held on to that for a long time, and I think there was a lot of pride in that, and I think it was not necessarily good or healthy.
Mm.
Um, Gimli is a new thing for me, so I have to think about that. I have to maybe reread Lord of the Rings and read it from his perspective. But that's kind of like a just a little seed that's been planted. I'm not as sure.
Perfect. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
This has been a lot of fun, Chris.
I had a great time. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Made my Sunday night. Made me forget about the Sunday scaries, which you know all about as a teacher. So
Yeah. How many years have you been in the classroom now?
as a lead teacher, this year is my ninth. But I've been in schools for about 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
And always in the middle school?
So actually, um, for a year, my first year of teaching, I was actually like a teaching assistant, on the Crow Reservation in Montana. So I did kindergarten, third, fifth, and seventh. So I did some lower school stuff, and I have stories of why I did not decide to do that age group. But yeah, so other than 2 years, for first 2 years, I taught ninth grade, which is basically middle school in Boston. And then since then, I've been teaching seventh and eighth.
Nice. Well, thank you for your service to the future generation,
Yeah.
and give them a little Lord of the Rings this semester.
I will. No, I'm going to bring it up tomorrow. I'm going to be like, I'm on a podcast. Please listen, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thank you, Derek. Have a great day.
Today's episode of The Plunge with Derek Holser, featuring Chris Tansey, discussing Boromir and Gimli, is brought to you by The Song of Durin, a poem sung by Gimli when the Fellowship of the Ring traveled through Moria. So beloved was this song that Samwise Gamgee wanted to learn it. And today we have a special reader. In fact, I present to you a recording of J.R.R. Tolkien reading The World Was Young, the Mountains Green, the Song of Durin.
The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in Mirror and saw a crown of stars appear as gems of a silver thread above the shadow of his head. The world was fair, the mountains tall, in elder days before the fall of mighty kings in Nargothrond and Gondolin, who now beyond the western seas have passed away. The world was fair in Durin's day. A king he was on carven throne in many pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor and runes of power upon the door. The light of sun and star and moon in shining lamps of crystal hue, undimmed by cloud or shade of night, there shone forever fair and bright. Their hammer on the anvil smote, their chisel clove and graver wrote. Their forge was blade and bound was hilt, their delver mine the mason built. Their beryl pearl and opal pale, and metal wrought like fish's mail. Buckler and corselet, axe and sword, and shining spears were laid in hall. Unwearied then were Durin's folk, beneath the mountains music woke, and harpers harped and minstrels sang, and at the gates the trumpets rang. The world is grey, the mountains old, the forge's fire is ashen cold, no harp is rung, no hammer falls, the darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb in Moria in Khazad Doom, but still the sunken stars appear and darken windless Mirror. There lies his crown in water deep till Durin wakes again from sleep.
That was J.R.R. Tolkien reading The Song of Joram. Thank you, Mr. Tolkien, for reading and for sponsoring today's episode of The Plunge.